The U.S. Supreme Court has declined President Donald Trump's bid to withhold payment to foreign aid organizations. The court has ordered that all payments scheduled to contractors and recipients of grants from the USAID and the State Department be paid. Joining us is Professor Oscar van Heerden, international relations expert from the University of Johannesburg. A very good evening to you, Prof. Always a pleasure to speak to you. Prof, well, it looks like the world has seemingly gone topsy-turvy as Trump makes abrupt decisions and executive orders by the night. The Supreme Court in the U.S., this decision by the Supreme Court in the U.S. to stop the Trump administration from withholding those payments to foreign organizations in the U.S. specifically, but this is for work that they've already done. Can we take this as a sign that while there may be political concerns, that the judiciary is something to fall back on there?
Yes, good evening, Martha. You know, because Trump had, in his first term, 2016, had appointed 3 of the conservative Supreme Court justices at the Supreme Court level, everyone assumed that they would be very favorable towards the Trump administration, and that might still prove to be true. But in this respect, 3 of the judges decided they are going to be siding with their Democratic counterparts, and they voted against Donald Trump's seizing of these funds because they felt that fair is fair. Work that has already been done, people need to be paid for that. And I think that's what informed the ruling against the Trump administration.
And speaking of those 2 as well, let's look at the fact that there were 4 conservative justices who dissented from that decision. What can we make of that?
Well, I mean, I think it's about allegiance. They feel that a lower court is not able to dictate to the federal government. That might very well be true in terms of their sentiments. But as per the letter of the law, I think the justices that ruled in favor found that there's gross unfairness in the application thereof. Remember, USAID and some of the other NGOs funding bodies were set up by Congress. And so Donald Trump is trying to rule by decree, hence the innumerate amount of executive orders trying to force matters through the president's office. And I think the court said no, not on this score. So,
I mean, for now, this order is temporary. What happens after the 10th of March? Because it seems that the judge has ruled and this temporary restraining order is only in place until the 10th of March. What happens after that?
Well, the federal government has to comply. You know, whether President Trump and those around him in cabinet agree with the ruling or not, the truth of the matter is that the execution must happen as per the ruling of the court. Otherwise, there's going to be repercussions and people will be breaking the law. And so I think that come the 10th of March, yes, it's a temporary reprieve, but thereafter, the court ruling must be enforced. It's as simple as that.
But also with this ruling as well, it speaks to work that has already been done. It's not about future work as well. So it doesn't really safeguard those organizations moving forward. Is that so, Professor?
No, that's what I read from the situation. The courts were very clear in their ruling. It's work that's already been done. People have complied with their obligations, and therefore they need to be compensated for that. It's not necessarily going to be applying to, for example, some of the programs here in South Africa and elsewhere on the African continent. But I think the issue here that is encouraging is that there are executive orders. Trump is trying to rule by decree, but we are going to enter and already have entered a period of lawfare, where people are deciding to challenge these things. Remember, there's another ruling that went against the Trump administration in terms of birthright citizenship. Trump tried to rescind that law, and the court upheld and said, no, if you are born in America, you will be automatically eligible for citizenship. So the period of lawfare is going to be taking shape in the United States. Some people are going to win against Trump. Other cases are going to be lost against Trump.
Now, Prof, when we're looking at, another decision that's been taken now, to defund and to withhold the funding when it comes to just energy transition to several countries, including South Africa as well. Should we take this ruling as basically kind of a litmus test that possibly, even though this one applies to only US organizations, that this could set the tone for the rest of the other organizations that aren't in the US?
I think we can take some encouragement from it. Remember, these agreements are contractual. They are binding agreements signed by different governments. And so it is a legal matter. I think that South Africa can, if it wanted to, take the matter up legally within the Supreme Court in the United States. Commitments were made, agreements were signed. Even if Trump wants to renege on it, there is room to actually legally challenge it. But I think that instead of wanting to have a legal showdown, if the commitment is not there, because it is about good faith practice, if the commitment is not there, I think South Africa and the South African government needs to look elsewhere to actually fill those gaps. And already we've heard from the European Union and certain quarters within the EU saying that they are more than happy to also step up and continue the partnership with South Africa on the energy just transition.
Yeah, and as we've seen, Prof, the Trump administration has seemingly snubbed the Ramaphosa administration. So even if the South African government were to take this on a legal basis or to try and take this up in the US legally, the environment is not quite fertile for any kind of conversation that is constructive at this point. Would you say that?
No, absolutely. I would say that. The truth of the matter is that we've seen how Trump deals with foreign heads of state, whether it is Macron, whether it is Stier Karma, or whether it is President Zelensky of Ukraine. I think now is not the time for President Ramaphosa or Minister Lamola to seek an audience with Trump. I think it will be an embarrassing engagement. We need to keep our distance, engage with the State Department and so forth, and other forces within the United States, of course. And I do think that the South African government needs to be clear that it is not necessarily going to be helpful to actually challenge these things legally. Instead, we need to look at diplomatic and political solutions.
Yeah, and while it is best for us to keep our distance right now, in the interim, what we've also seen are all other organizations going to the US, and there's obviously been a large misinformation and disinformation campaign as well that's been spoken about. We also saw, on the other hand, the Democratic Alliance also being welcomed at the White House and not necessarily the governing parties themselves.
Well, it's not just the governing party, Masa. I think we must state it clearly. Trump is refusing to meet with the elected government of the Republic of South Africa. Instead, his government is more than happy to meet with opposition parties and with far right-wing conservative groupings such as AfriForum and Solidariteit. So I think the writing is on the wall. The South African government mustn't bark up the wrong tree. Now is not the right time, as you say, to try and mend diplomatic spats. We need to keep our distance and have a much more sophisticated engagement with the Americans.
When that time comes. Professor, thank you so much. Always a pleasure getting your insights. That is Professor Oscar van Heerden, who's an international relations expert from the University of Johannesburg.